You can start now, I think.
Yes, Rukmini, we are live.
Rukmini, you need to unmute yourself.
Yes, as ever. A very good morning to everyone. Thank you so much for joining us at the Jindal School of Liberal Arts and Humanities for a very, very special keynote session as we begin our 5th Undergraduate Research Conference. We are honored to have with us as our keynote speaker, one of contemporary India's most impactful and articulate classical artists, activists, writers, and public intellectuals, Sri T.M. Krishna. Thank you so much, Sri Krishna, for agreeing to be here. And I'd just like to say that all of us, and especially our student body, are very excited for the opportunity to listen to you today. The Undergraduate Research Conference is a very special occasion for JSLH. And this edition is an even more important one, as it is our first after a 2-year gap due to the tumultuous events that have engulfed the world. While humanity continues to grapple with the pandemic, we believe that it is more important than ever to build and maintain connections between higher education institutions and students in India. We are extremely proud that the URC has been a key part of these networks and strongly believe that this edition will showcase the depth and exciting nature of undergraduate research in India, as well as open up new avenues for its future growth. So without further ado, I would also like to invite our Vice Chancellor, Professor Dr. C. Rajkumar, to open the conference with a welcome address. Thank you so much for joining us today, sir, as your support means a lot to our students.
Thank you, Rukmini, and I would like to extend a warm welcome to our very distinguished speaker, Mr. T.M. Krishna. Thank you very much, Mr. Krishna, for taking time out of your busy schedule to be here and encouraging our students. I actually would like to say that we have opened the campus physically since last week of February, and we would have liked this to be in a more physical manner. And in fact, our goal is to completely get out of this type of engagement and move into a more live, real, physical sort of interaction. And I can't wait to see you back on campus in the near future. I want to thank Professor Kathleen Madrosky, the Dean of the Jindal School of Liberal Arts and Humanities, Professor Jaini Bonerjee, Professor Priya Konungo, and of course Rukmini for putting this together. In fact, the Jindal School of Liberal Arts and Humanities has pioneered the idea of the Undergraduate Research Conference. This is one of the remarkable initiatives that the Jindal School of Liberal Arts and Humanities has promoted since its very founding. Now, this particular conference, and indeed the Jindal School of Liberal Arts and Humanities, is challenging a number of pre-existing viewpoints, perspectives that generally research and research ecosystem prevails in India. First of all, at least in Indian institutions, the idea of research is so much intrinsically connected to master's education and doctoral education. And the Jindal School of Liberal Arts and Humanities quite rightly challenged this and made the research ecosystem part of the undergraduate curriculum, course structure, and indeed their learning experience. And that's first and most important challenge to status quo. Second, the Jindal School of Liberal Arts and Humanities as an institution has consistently developed an interdisciplinary curriculum whereby it has challenged the existing paradigm of Indian higher education. As all of us know, we have all pursued what I have elsewhere called fragmented and bracketed education. The idea of a BA sociology or BA anthropology or BBA or BCom or whatever you want to call it, they are all far too specialized and intrinsically limited in their approach towards education. The Jindal School of Liberal Arts and Humanities, since its founding, has challenged that paradigm of higher education in India, the undergraduate paradigm, which focused on largely a single discipline and given limited options to students to pursue a widespread holistic education. And in that process, it embraced interdisciplinarity long before the National Education Policy 2020, which has outlined the vision of interdisciplinarity in Indian higher education. The third aspect of the Jindal School of Liberal Arts and Humanities, which is actually so connected to what some of the ideas will be promoted in the conference, is that it kind of transcended geographical and national boundaries in its approach. It kind of, in a way, provided leadership for promoting the study of global humanities. That essentially means that faculty members and researchers and even students coming from different parts of the world can have a conversation that can bring them all together to an idea that is much larger and also transcend these boundaries and these limitations. In that process, the big issues of our time, be it issues relating to justice or equality or non-discrimination or non-violence or respect for the rule of law, or for that matter, pursuing a deeper sense of egalitarianism in society, fighting for injustice, or of course, promoting arts and performing arts and recognizing the civilizational heritage that India has and other countries have also contributed. That brings the entire idea of global humanities to be part of the conversations and classroom learning that the Jindal School of Liberal Arts and Humanities. And that's a third unique feature of the Jindal School of Liberal Arts and Humanities. The fourth aspect of the Jindal School of Liberal Arts and Humanities, which ties in well with the larger vision of the university, is that the students are not limited to the study of only humanities and liberal arts courses in general. They have opportunities to pursue a whole range of courses in the 11 other schools within the university. That means students are able to cross-list and cross-register courses in the law school, in the business school, in the public policy school, in the international affairs school, in the banking and finance school, in the environmental school, in the psychology school, in the art and architecture school. The idea of, once again, challenging the fragmentation of education, which has been the larger imagination of Indian higher education, and that has been quite vociferously challenged within the context of the Jindal School of Liberal Arts and Humanities. And the fifth aspect of the vision of the Jindal School of Liberal Arts and Humanities, which this today's program also reflects, is that which is connected to both the idea of experiential learning and also commitment to social causes and commitment to society at large. This is so deeply embedded in the vision of the Jindal School of Liberal Arts and Humanities, and I applaud the Dean and Jaini and other colleagues who are present here, as well as other faculty members, as this is something that is so central and critical to the idea of education. In a way, education institutions and also universities and of course students have a very important role to play, which is about speaking truth to power. And you cannot be engaged in the exercise of speaking truth to power unless you are able to understand the big challenges of our society. And that also connects to bridging the gap between the theory and the practice. And there is no better way other than the Jindal School of Liberal Arts and Humanities' commitment towards experiential learning, which advances the cause of what I just mentioned, which is bridging the gap. So these 5 aspects that I just outlined in many ways has been translated in the vision of the Jindal School of Liberal Arts and Humanities, but more importantly, the Undergraduate Research Conference. I want to congratulate the faculty, including the Dean, for promoting such a conference and so consistently doing it. But also I want to congratulate and thank all the students who have had very strong interest and participation in this initiative. I am very confident that this experience which the students will have through this conference will help them challenge their pre-existing ideas and thought processes and help them dwell into new areas of thinking and approach, and in many ways, help them to charter a different course of action on things that they might have not done before. So in that process, we are very, very delighted that we have with us Mr. Krishna, who is, besides all his extraordinary qualifications and experience that he has contributed, he is a distinguished public intellectual who has maintained an autonomy of thought process and engaged and battled with important issues that face our own society and has never hesitated to be able to speak truth to power, and in many ways combined the role of art as a liberating exercise when it comes to pursuing independent ideas. There is no better person than him to kick off this conference, and I'm so delighted that he has accepted our invitation and is able to be here. As I mentioned early on, I'm doing this brief talk sitting in a place called Kanyakumari, which I have always found the most inspiring place in the world, where the confluence of Bay of Bengal, Arabian Sea, and Indian Ocean is there, and your thoughts and ideas are so crystal clear. I just returned from a walk in the ocean, and I can tell you that so much of problems that we're facing in society is largely because of the fact that we have not been able to liberate our mind and thought processes. If we can do that, and I know that the undergraduate research conference that we are having today will help all of us to engage in that exercise, we will not only be having better ideas and perspectives, but also we will help build a more safer and a less violent and a more equitable and a more just and a more egalitarian society. Thank you very much. And once again, congratulations to the Dean, the faculty members, and students present here. On a lighter note, I should tell Kathleen that Kathleen, in India, we are all notoriously known for being late. And in this group, all the Indians were ahead of time, and the only American who was late was you. So we have changed ourselves, and now it's your turn. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vice Chancellor, for those wonderful words. And I'm sure they will be of great encouragement to all our participants. I would now like to invite our Dean, Professor Kathleen Madrowski, to give the introductory remarks for the conference.
Thank you very much. And I did have a few technical problems, but here I am sitting in Sonipat. And
thank God you didn't say your grandmother died or there was a traffic jam.
No, well, both happened. But the limpid air here in Sonipat is inspiring me, just as your beautiful air is inspiring you down in the south. So thank you all very much. Thank you for your patience. You said it all, Raj, about the program, about the aspirations of liberal arts and humanities and what our trajectory has been. I would like to also thank all of the participating universities, because this gives a lot of hope to us that we have so many schools, despite the hiatus caused by the pandemic, who have agreed to be here. We had over 85 submissions of students for the program. For presentations, of which we were only able to choose 40. We hope that we'll be able to have more next year. But really, thank you all very much for continuing to have this interest in liberal arts and faith in students. I think that this is a really important thing. The pandemic looms large in everyone's mind, and the way we had to change life, the way we had to move to a different form of communication, what we learned, what we had to unlearn. And when I was thinking about this conference and looking at what some of the topics are that the students are writing about, made me think of a book by Arthur Kleinman, who is an anthropologist, ethicist, and psychiatrist at Harvard. It's called What Really Matters. I think the second part of the title, What Really Matters, is amidst uncertainty and danger. And he defines uncertainty and danger, not as the floodgates are opening or the bombs are falling. Those are dangers as well, but according to Kleinman, easier to understand. The real danger we're facing, and I think students as well as adults, but students are more aware of it than we are, is the conflict of who we are with the changing moral background and environment. And Kleinman's idea is the only way we can confront that is looking interiorly at ourselves, what makes us, what are our belief systems, because he talks about our concrete belief systems are what gives us strength. but they're changing what to do. They're changing, and how do we work with that? Kleinman says, look at the social, look at the political, and you have to navigate this as though it's an anthropological survey. I'm very much in favor of this. And when I look at some of the topics that our students, I'm talking about all the students in India, have chosen for their research projects, I'm very much impressed because they're dealing with topics like the Anthropocene. They're dealing with the changes, the upheaval caused by the pandemic and interrogating new perceptions. They are also looking at piecing together the pros and the cons of the structure of society. And very importantly, as you, Raj, brought up, the role of expressive arts, the role of art, the role of all levels of art and tradition in helping us understand our society. So I do hope while we have a really brilliant program ahead of us right now that people will stay and look at the student panels because they are our hope and they've taken a lot of courage to do this. I would also like to mention that I'm going to give a book plug to, you can't see it, it's backward probably, Sebastian and Sons. I read this, I thought I was going to be able to skim it, and this is our speaker, T.M. Krishna's book about and I will pronounce it wrong, Duncan, thank you, fabricators of these instruments. He goes into, well, he'll tell you about it, the intimacy, the way these individuals are their own families, their own people, but they're part of a very strong society. And so reading this book, I thought, well, this is really this responds to that question, what really matters? So I don't think you want to hear from me anymore. Thank you all very much, and we will go on to the next part. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Kathleen. It's so important to understand how this keynote fits into our broader ethos. And it is hopefully going to be an exciting couple of days for all the participants. And we are so grateful for your support and leadership in making this conference possible. I would now like to invite Dr. Priya Kanugo to introduce our keynote speaker, Shri T.M. Krishna.
Thank you, Rukmini. Good morning, everyone. I'm happy to introduce Mr. T.M. Krishna to you. He's often called the rock star Carnatic musician. Krishna sang his first concert at the age of 12, and in the last 2 decades, he's had a dream run of performances at almost all prestigious platforms of the world. His evocative voice, combined with the rigor of years of Carnatic training, never fails to mesmerize. Most artists strive to push the envelope, but our keynote speaker today finds the most spectacular and sensitive ways of breaking class, caste, and social divides through the power of his music. Some cases in point. He tried to bring the marginalized center stage by performing with the Jogappas, who are transgender musicians from Karnataka and Maharashtra. In his quest to integrate art for the classes with the masses, Krishna conceptualized Carnatic Kattai Kuttu, where Carnatic music shared stage with Kattai Kuttu, which is a fairly physical rural theater form of Tamil Nadu. Krishna's Porembaku song draws attention to acres of land that are being encroached around Ennore Creek and causing health hazards to locals. It's perhaps a recognition of this constant striving by T.M. Krishna to marry his art with social causes that has conferred because of which he was conferred the Ramon Magsaysay Award in 2016. Some people are multi-talented. T.M. Krishna is one of them. Musician exemplar he is, certainly, but alongside his ragam, tanam, pallavi, he's also a lyrical and prolific writer. He writes passionately about issues concerning society, religion, culture, and of course, classical music. And as for his music, so also for his writing, Krishna has been feted at various fora. He has co-written a book on the lives of some of the greatest Carnatic musicians entitled Voices Within Carnatic Music, Passing on an Inheritance. His 2013 path-breaking book, A Southern Music, The Carnatic Story, explores the aesthetic and socio-political facets of this form of music. For this, he was awarded the 2014 Tata Literature Award for Best First Book in the Non-Fiction category. His long-form essay, MS Understood, for the Caravan magazine, which is on MS Subbalakshmi, has set a benchmark in profile writing. And Krishna's latest book, which Dean mentioned, Sebastian and Sons, published in 2020, traces the history of the Mridangam maker and the Mridangam over the past century. It received the Tata Lit Live Award for the best non-fiction book for the year 2020. So apart from his prodigious talent as a singer and writer, Krishna has yet another talent, that of being an eloquent speaker who can connect with audiences of all age groups. So we are waiting, Mr. Krishna, to experience that. Over to you. Thank you.
I'd like to first thank you for the pressure you put on me. I have to be eloquent and I have to connect today. So, but I'll try.
That's easy for you.
I'll try my best. But I'd like to first thank Professor Dr. Rajkumar, Professor Kathleen Matosky, Professor Jayani Banerjee, Dr. Priya Kanungu, O.P. Jindal Global University, and specifically the School of Liberal Arts and Humanities for having invited me for this conference. And I agree with Dr. Rajkumar that I would have loved to be on your campus and have this conversation in person rather than this unreal online world that we have been forced to inhabit for the last couple of years. So I do hope I can come soon. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Rajkumar specifically for something. I did come to your campus a few months ago. I came to see the copy of the original Constitution of India, which is there at Professor Rajkumar's office. And I'd like to thank him. He was not there, but I thank him for the hospitality, and I spent over 2-3 hours going through it. So thank you very much for that, and I do hope I come back very soon for some live interaction with all of you and the students, of course. You know, I come from what is traditionally considered a non-academic world, because that word academic comes with the baggage of the idea of the institution. And very rarely is the word academic used without the conceptual framework or even the physical being of a building where you have people who have doctors before their name or professors before their name and benches and everything else that goes with it, right? So my world is considered, very honestly speaking, this airy-fairy creative zone where we always stay in the state of inspiration. And let me first break the bubble and say all that is just rubbish. Don't believe any artist who tells you that. So this is for all students. Don't believe any artist who tells you that they just looked at the sunrise and everything came. Nothing comes that way. Everything comes through a long process, which is probably not articulated or even realized by the artist. Therefore, I'd like to say that I actually every endeavor, every way of living or being or practicing or profession is a world of academics. You may not give it that title, you may not give it a graduate degree. You may not give it the same recognition in the officialdom of academics. But without the idea of academics, no practitioner can exist. But I'd like to step back a little bit more before I proceed on this and say, a research conference, I think the one word that pops into my mind is the idea of a question. And I think the Indian context, we never discussed the question. Forget about research for now. It's the question. I don't think I'm generalizing, there are exceptions, of course, but what is a question? Is a question we've never asked. So most of us don't know how to frame a question. We may ask things, but asking things does not mean it's a question. So let me try and see if I can loosely break this down and say, take it into three parts. First is, what is your question about? Now, in order to get into that place of, say I'm asking a question about my computer, I have to know something about the computer in order to be able to have the capacity to ask the question about the computer. So first, there is, even before you ask a question, the idea of finding out, or curiosity, or inquiry. It does not mean it needs to be complete or it needs to tick all the boxes. It does not mean, all it means is a genuineness and an honesty to inquire about something and to be curious enough to keep pushing it. So the first thing is what? Then why? What is the why of the question? Why are we asking that question? What is that trigger within us that is making us ask that question? That's also a very important thing, because that places, gives a certain context to the question itself. If, for example, I have rubbish outside my house every day, and I want to know why it is not cleared, right? I'm asking that question because I think my house is getting dirty. This is just the answer I'm giving you off the top of my head. So I don't want my house or the appearance of my house to be soiled because of the rubbish outside my house. So my question emanates from that why. Then there is a very important third element to this, which is often forgotten, is who is asking that question. We often forget that aspect of the question. A classic analogy for this will be, there is a difference between a woman asking a question about why women are treated in a certain manner in society or opportunities are denied, etc. A strong feminist question, and the same question being asked by a man. It's entirely different. The very nature of that question changes, because from a person who experiences what happens to them on an everyday basis, asking a question, the experiential trauma learning both of that, and the person who has never experienced that but is asking that question, changes the nature of that question. So when we say a question, there are these elements of what, why, and who. And often in the way we learn in this country, we are not even allowed to explore these elements. Questions are, in fact, often in society thought to be whimsical things that obstruct people, things that obstruct development, for example, or things that don't allow people to grow, societies to grow, etc. So I think it's important that we debunk that. At the same time, we think seriously about what a question is, because no research or no idea of such exploration will mean anything unless we ask these questions of the primary reason we are taking that step in an endeavor. Now, coming to my own world, so I'll be weaving in my own life in this dialogue for a bit. So in the world of Carnatic music, and I prefer using the word Carnatic music to classical music. I don't like the word classical, so I'm not going to use it, just to place that in context, maybe for another discussion another day. There is also this chasm between theory and practice, or what we call musicology, and the musician. And this is something that's ingrained in me from the time I started that. I remember many musicians telling me, those guys write books. Can they sing a concert? A classic thing I've asked, Or, for example, I'm sure cricketers also say this, I would write something about how maybe Virat Kohli's cover drive, his footwork is not good enough. He's probably thinking, what does this guy know about moving the feet and hitting a cover drive, right? But even if the person is well-versed, say technically or theoretically, the musician always debunks the theorist, the musicologist, of saying, he doesn't know anything. And usually we consider a musicologist a failed musician. Now, obviously, this guy didn't make it, and therefore he just started reading these manuscripts and came up with these ideas. So there is this huge chasm between the theorist and the musician. I remember in my music classrooms and in casual conversations, this always came up, So, and the other thing is, what is the use? What is the use of these books and these theories that they write? And I want to give you a story that one of my teachers told me. So apparently at a music conference in the morning, there was this very intense discussion on a certain raga and how it needs to be sung and how it should not be sung, and a lot of debate happening in the morning. And one of the musicians who that morning came up and said, no, this is not done. You should not do this. This is not as per the rules, the grammar of the raga, had a concert at the same conference that evening. And he gets on stage and does exactly what he said in the morning should not be done to the raga. So the same individual in the morning was giving us a different theory of the raga, and as a practitioner was doing something else. I'll come back to this because I want us to explore whether it really is a contradiction. Because it seems like a contradiction, but is it a contradiction? Is an interesting thing for us to explore. I'll loop back to it at some point of time. Now, as a student of music, I learned music like most other people would, beginning with rote and moving on to trying to, then probably starting feeling something in the music, something that emotively moved me. Then trying to contemplate about what am I doing? How am I doing this? How do I sing this better? How do I understand this melodic idea better? How do I explore a rhythmic sequence? And all these things were completely musically related. And I was just working in that area, right? So my endeavor ultimately was to master all this so that I could be a better performer. That when I got on stage, I had all the toolkits required intellectually and emotionally, in order to deliver the experience of the music. This is all that I care about. And if theory, if the academic side was any use, and I'm using that word specifically, the utility is another interesting question about academics. Is the utility of what I studied was judged by whether it could be translated to the performance. Here is another interesting point. How do we judge the utility of research? How do we judge the utility of understanding or studying or theorization? Is it merely in whether I can sing it or practice it? An interesting thing happened recently at a conference that I was participating in. It was a conference on equity in education. And one of the questioners was not in India. He was sitting in the States and asking questions. And there was we had talked about the issues in equity and struggles that are there for people who run schools and the philosophies, etc. He was tired of this entire discussion. And after 10 minutes came up with this thing saying, all of you are talking philosophies. Tell me practically what can you do? And I love that question because he was fundamentally telling me we were just talking things that actually have no relevance to action. This whole idea of action vis-a-vis thought, that somehow when you're thinking about something, you're an impractical person who should be in some room with books all around you and just reading it. But you do not know. Only the person on the road or on the street knows. This is the other problematic area, that the idea of ideation or philosophy or thinking has to have an immediate more importantly, immediate and a direct relevance to what is being done, and if it doesn't, it is a waste of time. This is also a very, very dangerous locality of conversation, because the relevance of an idea many times happens much after the idea actually was propounded. Now, even relevance, does the relevance have to have direct impact on an action? Could the relevance of a thought be something that was there in the mind of people for a generation and found its own avenue of flowering much later in a manner that you may not connect the two? You may not even find an association. So an important part of any process of thought, which is research that you do, is not to do it because you're searching for its relevance in contemporary or in your life. You do it because the idea is important. You do it because you believe that that question is a valid question, having gone through the three processes of why, what, and who. That is what we need to be as human beings. This is if you go to the sciences, you have this idea of science and applied science. This somewhere is also similar to that, right? Many people will tell you that, what is the point of something that does not have relevance in applied science? It is not important whether it has relevance in applied science. And in humanities, it gets even more slippery because, especially in Indian context, because most people believe humanities does not have relevance in actual everyday functioning, making money, going to a shop, buying something, etc. But humanities, especially research in humanities, tells us everything about why we live, how we live, why we go to a shop, why we don't go to another shop, why would we constantly do the same thing again and again, what is habit, what does it mean to not be habitual, what do we see, what don't we see, what do we like, what don't we like, what is beauty, what is ugly, or what we consider both these dimensions. Every one of these aspects is only explored by the humanities, whether it's historical, structural, anthropological, experiential, creative, color, sound, movement, or just being static. This entire gamut of human experience is humanities. So it is very important that we do not think of research as something that needs to have results. I'm using result in a cliched manner, not in a larger understanding that we can have of it. So when I initially was involved in musical learning through the academic side, I was only worried about what is its application in my concert that evening. So now what was I doing? I was doing two interesting things here. One, I already decided what my concert was. So there was no questioning of that. I had said, this is the model. This is a success model. This is a model that I know to run. I'm going to run this model. Everything that provides me more, to use a dangerous word, ammunition, to make that model successful, I will take. So what I was asking was not even a question. What I was exploring was not even any thought. I just wanted data and information in order to make myself more successful in the act of performance. Is it wrong? No, I'm not passing judgment on the wrong and right. It's not necessarily wrong, but it is limiting to what you're doing. That's something we have to recognize. What changed in me? Let me ask that question of myself. And I think that's a good place to move forward. Did I have one of those moments of realization? No, nothing of that sort. Absolutely nothing of that sort. There was no eureka that really happened. But if you're honest to yourself, and something will happen to every individual, is once you say you've got all the data that you required, all the information that you required to make yourself a performer, in my case, a singer, a successful singer, someone who can draw on applause, etc. There is only so much information you're going to get. After a point, you're not going to look for anything because you've cracked it. The moment you've cracked it, you know this is going to work, and you're just going to do that a day in and day out. There may be superficial changes, which is a change due to time, age, and maybe just surface level restlessness. But beyond that, you're just going to do the same thing. So the one thing non-questioning does it makes you a completely habitual human being. And it also does something else to you. It also makes sure you never get out of that comfort of where you are, if you have reached a position of comfort, if you have. So at some point, I think that lingering idea that I was doing something that was just habitual, very pleasurable, I may add, very, very happening, made me very happy, made the audience very happy. I got all the applause I wanted. I could get more if I wanted. But at some time, I was asking, what was I doing? What was this transaction? And the interesting thing about a habitual transaction is that both people or parties know exactly what they're transacting. And you're transacting it only because you know exactly what you're transacting. So the person receiving my music knew exactly what they were receiving. I knew what exactly to give them. It was convenience. We were very happy. And at some point, that started bothering me. And I was like, what am I doing? Am I going to do this for the rest of my life, 40 years of my life? Am I just going to constantly just do this? And that, interestingly, got me to ask existential questions about my music. And these were questions that were not going to directly benefit me in any manner. I didn't know what they were going to do, which I'll come to, but I realized, but they were not going to help me become a more successful singer. No, they were not going to. So what are the questions? In my case, they were simple. Why am I singing this music? Where did this music come from? And who is listening to this music? Why, who, and where, which is a what question, interestingly, by the way. In a way, that's what it is, right? Why, what, and who. So this meant I had to read history. First, I had to read musicology. So I had some wonderful scholars and professors who were willing to put up with this uneducated musician, if I can add that, who suddenly wanted to know something about old treatises, something about what was written in the Natya Shastra, what was written in the Sangeet Ratnakara, tell me what Bharata says, etc., etc. But they were kind enough to engage with me. And I spent some time, a considerable amount of time, just looking at where this music came from. And the reason that was important for me is in Indian context, everything is old. Everything is ancient. Everything has been handed down like some precious thing from generation to generation. And all I need to do is make sure I hold it. Right? So one of the problems in the questioning area in the Indian context is we are told not to be individuals. We are taught to be a part of some collective or the other. So in a way, your job is to preciously hold on to whatever this collective that you belong to has handed down to you. And your individuality has to be drowned in that sense of that collective, that you have to be part of it, and your job fundamentally is to pass on this treasure to the next generation. The moment you bring an individual in, the individual can subvert, can sabotage this passing on. So we are often not given that space of just being an individual. So for the first time, I was being an individual here. Until then, I was a musician, part of the Carnatic community who wanted to protect this to whatever extent I want. And I was passing on this treasure, but I was asking this question for the first time, is it treasure? If so, is it really so pristine? If so, what is pristine about it? What is tradition? Why is this being passed on to me? Why should I like it? Why can't I just dislike it? I mean, dislike it in a sense, in a non-respectful sense. Please remember, not everything that you dislike, you disrespect. There's a difference between disliking something without disrespecting and disliking something but disrespecting it. There's a huge difference, and that's, again, for probably a conversation another day. But I'm just going to throw these things in for you to think about if you can. So I started thinking about these old treatises, reading them to whatever extent. I was no scholar. I was not well read in Sanskrit, but I had enough people helping me out. And the interesting discovery for me in that whole process is that I was not carrying something which is 2,000 years old. I was carrying something that has changed so much that I can't make this linear connectivity to something that was written in a treatise that's probably written anywhere between 2nd century second century before the Common Era and second century after. 400 years, I had no clue. So it rattled my entire existence. It rattled my faith in being a representative of something that's so old and that's so hoary and that needs to be protected. And what did it do to my music? That's an interesting part. And that's why I want to come to the idea of what it does when something is seriously an internal process. I didn't do this to change my music. I didn't do this thinking it's going to change my performance. I just did it because I was curious. I was utterly curious about this whole art form. Now, I'm not going to the details of the kind of research that we did. We did a lot of research, which was also about treatises written 100 years ago. We tried reconstructing old music. A lot of fascinating work that some of it is still going on. And it brought me to the conclusion, or not a conclusion, brought me to the place that I realized that all that I treasured in this music is fairly contemporary. And that I believe even the belief that something was 500 years old is a contemporary creation. Isn't that fascinating? Isn't that fascinating? You create a contemporary feeling of you not being contemporary. Wow. Amazing species we are. That you want to create a feeling that you're non-contemporary at a time when you're doing it is present. Why do you do that? So this led to a lot of change in my practice of music. The way I sang, and at a very basic level, and this is difficult to articulate on an online session, is the idea of tonality, the idea of how should Carnatic music sound. When I say sound, I just mean by sound, not the technicalities. All of us, for example, can recognize most kinds of music by the sound of it. You would know by the sound what it is, whether it's R&B, whether it is rap, by just the sound, you know the difference, whether it is rock and roll, heavy metal, whatever. Similarly, or Hindi cinema music vis-a-vis Tamil cinema music or stuff like that. So I realized that the way I listen changed based on what I read. Remember, I read. There was no way for me to listen to music as it was sounded 600 years ago. I read. But what I read and learned changed the way I listened, changed the way I heard, changed the way what I thought was acceptable, what was unacceptable, what I thought was pure, what I thought was an impurity or a corruption. Everything in my listening apparatus had transformed based on my learning in a book or in a discussion or in a conversation. And this was the first huge impact on my own work or my own singing, my own sound. It led to me making huge changes to the way I performed, the way I sang the music, the way I expected. My relationship with my audience changed. I didn't like the applause anymore. I didn't like the applause because, as all of us know, if a piece ends, we all applaud. We just applaud. And I realized that that's just habit. So what you're, as a musician, I'll give you a side note here. You know, after every piece, you get an applause. It's because everybody's just going to do it. So you know what a musician is looking for? Two things. One is the intensity of the applause. So if the applause is louder, I know it's really considered good. The applause is smattering, then I know, it didn't work. So then you're judging even applauding. And I remember musicians on stage who many times said, you know, you don't have to pay to, we're not asking you money to applaud. Just applaud loudly. It's like almost like we wanted the applause to be loud. Just give it to me. You know, don't be stingy or, in that manner. So we were also, and there are these sounds that happen. Every culture has other ways of it. In Carnatic music, for a musician, if somebody does or aha, is like the real applause, right? So anyway, I did not want the applause anymore. I felt the applause was disturbing. I felt that the way we were performing the music itself was probably doing disservice to the music, which means that the performative action is not necessarily completely, entirely representative of the music. That is, the way I perform is one dimension or one possibility, but it cannot be the only way you understand the music. And this realization wouldn't have happened to me if I had not had the unselfish and an impersonal inquiry into the music. So an important part of research or understanding or questioning is that at some point in the process, the individual engaging in it is not asking the question as the individual. That is, you're not asking it because you are asking it. You're asking it because the question is important. It is a public question. It's a question of public importance, which means that the idea of the personal and the public smudges over there. That the personal becomes, you yourself become part of the public who's asking that question. And in humanities, this becomes very important because often, even in the world of humanities, there is a gap between an intellectual understanding of something and an emotional realization of that understanding. I find this as much in the humanities world as I'll find any other world. So I think it'd be unfair to think humanity does not have this. I've seen in a large number of people, they'll intellectually be able to tell you something, but they emotionally are not in a position yet to look at it. And this is an example I use often, but it happens to many people. So I've had this discussion about music and discrimination, etc., with many people from the world of the liberal arts. And, at an intellectual level, we'll all agree and say, of course, there are problems, there is societal discrimination, etc., etc. And then I'll say, what kind of music do you listen to? And they have to be politically correct. So what they will tell me is, I listen to all kinds of music. That's usually the first standard answer. And that's a cop-out, complete cop-out, because it's nonsense. Nobody listens to all kinds of music, right? So I say, no, but what do you prefer? What do you like? And usually have 2-3 ways of expressing that point. So the first they'll say, I love, for example, folk music. In fact, I would say they should never use that word, but they still use that word. So they'll tell you folk music. So it's I love it. I love folk music. But what I really like is classical music. And that tells you a lot. Because it's not just an expression of preference. It's an expression of an inability to go into a different culture from the culture in which they are seated. Now, they find folk music interesting, important socially, to be empowered. They understand the discrimination, all that they understand. But emotionally, they're still unable to invest themselves in the aesthetic culture of what they called folk. And this comes from a deep-seated habituation and deep-seated discriminative practice. I'll call it out as a discriminative practice. Because they may know nothing about classical music, by the way. It's not like they're the most knowledgeable people Carnatic or classical, Hindustani or Carnatic. It's just a feeling that comes from their inhabitation or their positionality. So it's also important that our research at some point allows us to go out of our skin, that it in a way becomes a mirror, that you're looking outward to learn, but at some point that mirror is looking back at you. And that some way changes you as a person. I think it's very important that we address these kind of ideas in idea of research. And it is important that it happens at an undergraduate level. It's important that it happens after school. Probably in school, but I can't deal with that, so I'm not going there. But at least after school, that we think that we have to think beyond ourselves, because that is the spirit of humanity. The spirit of humanity is being able to think beyond yourself and emotionally, and I'll stress that, emotionally feel beyond yourself. So I don't know how much time I've taken. How much time do I have? I thought I won't fill 45. It looks like I've filled much more, but how much time have I taken? If somebody can help me out there.
You're fine, sir.
Okay, good. Okay, good. I'm glad I'm fine. Thanks. So another thing, a couple of other things, there's a lot we can discuss about. We can just talk about every one of these points. And I wish I was live there, we could have an interaction. I prefer conversations than to lectures because I always think that the comments and the questions make me think better on things I've said. So, but possibly at some point of time we'll do it. But let's look at the other thing. This whole idea that a question is limited to its domain, right? The idea of specialization, the idea of that it is somewhere related, my questions relate to music. Now, when did I move from there to the questions that were about larger conditionalities? Now, it's not like I made an effort and I decided one day that I must read sociologists and anthropologists and historians. No, I never did any such thing. But you know, any honest question can never be limited to a domain. Your understanding of the question can be domain specific, but all questions are not domain specific. So one of the things that happened to me is that the questions I was asking about my practice, first musicologically, also meant I was asking about the practice of who is practicing it? Why are these people practicing it? Why are these people not practicing it? Why do some people find this music beautiful, the other people don't come? Are they being stopped from coming? If so, what? What about people who were practicing it but are not practicing it anymore? If, because, you know, we also use this very convenient expression that arts are universal. Arts are not universal. Don't believe that. They are not. The spirit of being open, if you call art that, in a philosophical expansion of the term, yes, acceptable. But arts are not universal. They are as dirty and limited as every other human activity. How can you expect anything better? It's after all us, you and me, who are dealing with both these things. So my questions suddenly started being questions that bothered me because they challenged who is participating? Why am I participating? Why are some people not participating? And very soon, these questions were about things that were beyond just singing Carnatic music or even singing Carnatic music with an academic bent of mind. It was beyond that. It was about larger society. It was about my interaction with larger society, my personal relationships, my inability to see the way I operate, my inability to see the way society operates. So real research and questioning must naturally be an interdisciplinary process. It cannot be a specific domain process. It can be where does domain come in? Specific domain allows you a pathway to understand the larger process, which is why domain is important. You can't ask a generic question. When you ask it domain specific or a domain in which you're involved, it allows you a pathway to understand it with specificity and with a clarity. But once that understanding happens, it has to flow into the larger spectrum of multidisciplinary and multi-domain questioning. If that doesn't happen, your world remains closeted, remains boxed. And only when it goes multidisciplinary do you reflect upon yourself. Until then, you will not reflect upon yourself. So this naturally means that it leads to a creative process, leads to you looking at possibilities in an unselfish manner, you being able to challenge yourself. And to me, if there is one thing that I want to remain in my life constantly, is I want to always be uncomfortable with myself. And when I say uncomfortable, I mean I want discomfort. Because true questioning will keep you uncomfortable. Because the moment that ceases, you will get into a comfort zone of being what you want to be. So the one thing that true questioning and research and interdisciplinary learning can do is make you always doubt. And doubt is a very good thing. Doubt yourself. And doubt not in a manner that destabilizes you psychologically, not that doubt, but doubt that challenges who you are. That doubt has to be a constant thing in your life. So, let's say a few more things and I will conclude. The other couple of aspects that are important is one is this idea of failure, the idea that something fails. You are part of an endeavor, you're trying to understand something, you're trying to move towards what you think is a conclusion. But the conclusion is not reached, or the conclusion is not the conclusion you wanted to reach. I'm going to give you an example of my own explorations. So just before I began, Professor Madrowski actually showed you my book, Sebastian and Sons, a book about Mridangam creators, makers. Now, it's a book that was published just before the pandemic. It's a book about mainly marginalized people who make this instrument played by the caste privileged Brahmins. So you can see the chasm straight. I'm just giving you a reductionist description of what the book is. But at the essence, it is the interaction between these two. You're frozen. Can you hear me? Okay, you can hear me. Okay. So this interaction between these two worlds. Now, as a person who was entering that domain, I'm a Carnatic musician, but I knew nothing about the world of making an instrument. Nothing about the Dalit Christians who made the instrument. I knew nothing. I knew names. I met a few. That's about it. As much as I was talking about caste and discrimination, here was an obvious example of something happening in my neighborhood, my backyard, which I knew nothing about. So when I entered that research, I did not know. I thought this was this very clear black and white happening, right? You can just say that, yeah, these people make these wonderful instruments and these people are not recognized for it because of their caste location. Very simple answer given in one. But it's not that, is it? Every interview that I went to, every conversation I did, every time I was in the field, and it was the first time I was almost doing anthropological work. It was journalistic work. I had never worked in that manner. My previous books were more intellection of my own, based on my own experiences. Here, I was trying to find out something. So it's completely a place of great discomfort because I didn't know, again, how do you make a relationship in an interview? How do you get honesty in that conversation? I had no clue. What do I want to know? I didn't even know what I wanted to know. I had this vague idea that I was trying to understand the world, but I didn't know what to know. I was not trained. I was not trained as an anthropologist. I was not trained as a journalist. I don't know what question, but I was learning this on the road, on the fly. So, but, as those conversations developed and as those interactions developed, I very soon realized that the book is its own. The book is its own happening. And the complexity of that world is something that I had no idea about. So the important thing in our process of finding something is to start, if not start, to come to a point soon where you also realize you don't know. And it's okay not to know. You don't need to know everything. You may not still know something at the end of it, which is also fine. So this idea that I don't know allows you then to explore with freedom, allows you then to ask questions that you will not ask if you come up from a position of I know something. So these interviews changed the nature of what I was exploring. The book at the end was not the book that I thought I was going to write. It brought up questions that were never in my head before. That actually at some level, this was also a book about knowledge. I never thought of this book as a book of knowledge, but I now see it as a book of knowledge, of the idea of knowledge. I'm not going to use academic words and confuse that approach because you can very easily flow to a very technical conversation. But the idea of, say, why is something studied at OP Jindal called knowledge? Why is something that is learned on the street not called knowledge? Simple question. Why is a Mridangam player playing called knowledge, but a Mridangam maker making not called knowledge? What determines knowledge? To me, that book is at its essence that, because the one thing that makes a human being is the human being's mind. The first thing that we strip of people that we oppress is their mind. Because the moment you strip their mind, you can do to them anything physically. Because they are not a person anymore. They don't have feelings because they don't have a mind. They don't have a thought. They don't have thought. So all I want to say at the end is that it is very important that all of us come with some humility to anything that we inquire about. And even if you don't start from there, I didn't start from there. I started from great arrogance. So I know we can begin there too. It's fine. But just remember that you're starting from a position of arrogance. And this is applicable to any research person, irrespective of age, irrespective of field, irrespective of number of doctors they may have before their name. It's applicable to the 12th grader, to the undergrad, to the grad student, to the PhD, to the postdoc, to me, and to you, and to all of us here. And I wish the conference the very best. And I do hope that I can meet you all soon, sometime in person. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Krishna. That was an invigorating. I mean, I have listened to you before in many forums, and it is always a pleasure, and I always learn something new. We do have a little bit of time in the session, so I was hoping that perhaps we could ask maybe a question or two. Sure. That could be okay. So one of my colleagues, Dr. Swati Chawla, is asking, how do you think we can create spaces in a university classroom for more deeper, more visceral appreciation for stuff like music, stuff like not just in terms of expressive arts classes, of course, which are there, but in kind of broader, how do we bring this appreciation when one is less familiar, one hasn't grown up with it, and how do you have any thoughts on how those can be integrated into classrooms?
Okay, so I'll start with some questions. I'm just going to throw it out there because I hear this question asked many times. Bringing art into a classroom. But I always like to ask one question: which art? Have we asked that question of ourselves? So when we say unfamiliar with, what do we want to familiarize the students with? Is it going to be an art form that I find invigorating or people like me find invigorating? So let's start the question from there of saying, when we say we want art in the classroom, are we talking about a very eclectic classroom where there may be art forms that I, the person who wants to bring it, I'm extremely uncomfortable with? Are we willing to go there? Or should the idea of art in the classroom actually come from the students? So familiarity or unfamiliarity, who is deciding that? Why should a classroom have classical music? I'm going to challenge that question directly. Why? Now, rather than that, I would say, can we have a classroom where multiple forms of music, known, unknown, habituated, are all challenged? And when I say challenged, I mean in their sound. We could ask very interesting questions of why certain kinds of music sound as music to me and why the other sounds as noise. Are we okay with a classroom where heavy metal is played every day? Tell me which professor will agree. I'd love to know. Or for example, rap where you have 4-letter words coming in as being the primary way we are exploring art. Are we okay with an institution? I mean, let's ask ourselves these very honest questions. Let's ask ourselves these honest questions. Because when we say this, we are already listening to the music in our ears. We know which music we want in the classroom, whatever it is. And I want to challenge that notion. So I would say, yes, you need the arts in the classroom. You need the music in the classroom, but it's all in plurality. And every one of them have to be engaged in a way that we can open multiple minds. Again, they can dislike it. But can we create mutual respect for sounds, mutual respect for beauty, mutual respect for the fact that why don't we engage? So I think the classroom through the arts can be an extremely interesting space. Now, this can, of course, lead to the learning of some of those art forms also on campus. But I also find a homogeneity in that of what kind of arts should be taught in a campus. I can imagine a number of people running away for the kind of art forms, and I may be ideas too. But why are we running away from it? Why are we running away from? So I think it is a more complicated, I completely agree that we can, but I think how we can do it is to free ourselves first and say, can there be different sounds in a classroom or different tunes in the classroom? And can we then allow that to be a contested space where we are asking sonic questions? You don't have to ask social questions. You can ask sonic questions. I had an experience where a kind of music was noise to me, and after 2 years, it became music to me. I was fascinated how that change happened in me. The same person, the same tune was noise, the same tune was music. What changed in me for me to be able to emotionally connect, more than emotionally connect, that my hearing apparatus processed it differently, or my mind eventually did. So there is a great space for it. There is a great possibility. Just listening to multiple things and allowing things to come to be brought out in discussions, with of course people who can enable a serious discussion, is a great way, I think, to have the classroom filled with not just music, but any art for that matter. But that's my cautionary note on it.
Thank you. And perhaps just to maybe think about that. I mean, this is just probably, our Jindal being JSLH attempting to, attract you back to our campus sooner. But if you were, if we could have you for like a masterclass or something, what do you think you might want to engage our students on? And what could we, what could we entice you with to come?
You can just entice me with anything. Engaging with students is good enough for an enticement. It's always fun to be in a classroom. I love classrooms because I love the fact that students make me question anything that I say and probably come up with questions that I didn't think about. So I love a classroom because at the end of it, it's a great high of exchange. So you can just entice me with a classroom filled with students. I don't have to give me anything else.
All right. I think we're about ready to wrap up. Thank you so much once again, Mr. Krishna, for joining us. It was incredible to listen to you. And I know that I wish our students could have engaged with you in person. They were that, as we said, I mean, we all miss that very much, and that kind of engagement.
We'll hopefully do that. Yes, we'll probably do that.
Absolutely. But it was wonderful even to have you as, I mean, it's wonderful as well. So thank you once again. Thank you, Professor Raj, for joining us as well. Well, I mean, we are having some requests from so that, perhaps a melody, perhaps a little bit of...
Not the day.
not the day. Right, I tried.
After speaking for 45 minutes, it's not
that
easy
is
to
true.
sing.
That is true. That is true. But I thought I would ask. But thank you so much. Thank you so much, Professor Mudrovsky, for joining us, and everyone here. And we will be starting our first student panel at 10:45. So please do join us, everyone who's watching. Thank you once again for being here, and we hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.
Thank you.